Overall, I enjoy how the Sonos Beam 2 sounds. The soundbar has great instrument separation, making it sound very open and immersive. And since the soundbar now has eARC support, it's now compatible with higher quality audio formats like Dolby Atmos. However, due to this soundbar's max volume performance, it isn't my top pick. But today we're going to see how the Sonos Beam 2 compares against the Bose Smart Soundbar 300 and the JBL Bar 5.0. Now first, there's pricing. The JBL Bar 5.0 has a retail price of $400, whereas both the Sonos and Bose have gotten a price increase to $450. Now for the purpose of this review, we're going to be strictly focusing on the soundbars themselves. Now, if you wanted to, with both the Sonos and Bose, you can add an external subwoofer and or surround sound speakers. But for the purpose of this video, we're only going to be focusing on the soundbars themselves. Nonetheless, if you're going to pick any of these soundbars up, they'll be linked down below. And if you want to further support the channel, check out the merch shelf down below. I've made some shirts and hoodies that look and feel great. And if you've been watching me for a while, you know I can be very particular. So I'll only set my name on something that I'm really proud of. Now first, let's talk about the design of these soundbars. From a material standpoint, all of these soundbars are mostly made out of plastic. So they do a really good job of not reflecting any light when watching movies with these soundbars in a dark room. So all of these soundbars do a good job of disappearing. Which is good because soundbars are supposed to be heard, not seen. And when it comes to dimensions, the Sonos has a length of 25.6 inches, a width of 3.9 inches, and a height of 2.7 inches. Overall, this is the smallest soundbar here, but it is the thickest, which I do find a little odd. Then there's the Bose, which has a length of 27.5 inches, a height of 2.3 inches, and a width of 4 inches. As you'll notice, the Bose is noticeably thinner than the Sonos. And finally, there's the JBL. It has a length of 27.9 inches, a height of 2.3 inches, and a width of 3.9 inches. Overall, all of these soundbars should be easy enough to place in your home theater setup. None of these soundbars are complete units like, let's say, the Sony HTA5000. And all of these soundbars should be easy enough to wall mount because none of these soundbars have an external power brick that you have to worry about hiding. However, I do have to point out that the JBL is the only soundbar here that comes included with a wall mounting kit, whereas with both the Bose and Sonos, that's sold separately. Now, both the Sonos and JBL come included with HDMI cables, whereas the Bose only comes included with an optical cable. So you are going to have to get your own optical cable if you decide to go with the Bose, because a rule of thumb, you usually want to try to use an HDMI connection between your TV and soundbar. So I do think that this is a hidden cost that you should be mindful of if you decide to pick up the Bose. But this now leads us to some differences between these soundbars when it comes to their HDMI ports. Now, the Bose has the least impressive HDMI port because its HDMI port only has ARC support, whereas the Sonos Beam Gen 2, its HDMI port has eARC support. So if you were to use the Sonos with a TV that also has eARC support, then you're going to be able to take advantage of higher quality audio formats like Dolby Atmos, just to name a few. Now, what Dolby Atmos is that it's an audio format that allows creators to play sounds in a three-dimensional space. Now, we will dive deeper into Dolby Atmos in a little bit, but for right now, I just want you to understand that all content doesn't automatically have Dolby Atmos, and all TVs don't have eARC support. Now, the HDMI out port on the JBL also has eARC support, and this is great because this soundbar is also compatible with Dolby Atmos. However, the JBL is the only soundbar here that also has an HDMI input, and this HDMI input can do 4K Dolby Vision. So if you've got a Blu-ray player, you can always plug it in directly into this soundbar. However, personally, I would not plug in my PS5 or Xbox Series X into the HDMI input on the JBL because I don't think this HDMI input can do 120 Hz. So depending on what game you're playing, the JBL could become a bottleneck. However, if you've got a gaming console that can only do up to 60 frames per second, then you should be fine. But the short of it is, the fact that the Bose only has ARC support is a bit of a letdown, especially in 2022, whereas it is much nicer that both the Sonos and JBL have eARC support, and the HDMI import on the JBL is great, especially if you have a Blu-ray player. Because personally, I really feel that both the Sonos and Bose are strictly aimed at someone who is only going to be streaming their content from their TV. And also, the Beam 2 does have an Ethernet port on the back, which could come in handy if you plan on placing this soundbar in an area of the house with spotty Wi-Fi, and if you plan on constantly streaming music to it. However, I feel that if you're still suffering from spotty Wi-Fi around the house, I feel that you should probably upgrade your wireless network before getting a soundbar. If you were to upgrade your wireless network, it's going to improve your streaming experience because your content isn't going to buffer, among many other things. And besides, all of these soundbars have Wi-Fi, and all of these soundbars have AirPlay 2 support, which is great if you're an iPhone user, and all of these soundbars have Chromecast support, which is good if you're an Android user. So as long as you're connected to the same Wi-Fi network as these soundbars, then you're going to be able to stream music to them. And with both the Sonos and Bose, if you want to, you can use them as a smart speaker, and they both play nice with either Google Assistant or Alexa. What is the current price of Bitcoin?
One Bitcoin is worth $42,900 down 2.9% over the last 24 hours.
Now, you can't actually use the JBL as a smart speaker, but you can use Google Assistant or Alexa to control the JBL if you were to connect it to your Wi-Fi network. But nonetheless, you don't have to use a voice assistant with any of these soundbars, and you don't have to connect them to Wi-Fi, because I know some people don't like to due to security reasons. But regardless, I do recommend that you at least connect these soundbars up to your Wi-Fi network so that you can take advantage of either AirPlay or Chromecast. And you're also going to have to connect the Sonos and Bose up to Wi-Fi so that you can use them with their companion app. But one minor detail that I do want to point out here is that you can't connect to the Sonos using Bluetooth like you can with these other two soundbars. Now, I know this is a very niche issue, but I do want to point it out just in case you're someone that does plan on not connecting your soundbar up to Wi-Fi, but you still want to be able to stream music to it. But now let's talk about speaker setups. The Beam 2 has a single frontward firing tweeter, which are then flanked by a pair of frontward firing woofers. There's also a total of 3 passive radiators, 2 that fire out the front and 1 that shoots out the back. And finally, there's a woofer at each end of this soundboard that is angled out at like a 45-degree angle. Overall, this is an impressive speaker setup. But then there's the Bose, which also has a single frontward firing tweeter, which is also flanked by a pair of woofers. But instead of passive radiators like on the Sonos, the Bose has 2 bass chambers with exhaust ports that shoot out the back. And just like the Sonos, there's a woofer on each side that is angled out at like a 45-degree angle. And finally, there's the JBL. It has 3 frontward firing woofers, and at each end there's another woofer that shoots out at like a 45-degree angle, and these try to focus on the highs. And the soundbar has a total of 4 passive radiators, 2 shooting downwards and 2 shooting upwards. Now, thanks to eARC, both the Sonos and JBL have Dolby Atmos support, but it's not true Dolby Atmos, it's virtual Dolby Atmos. Neither of these two soundbars have the upward firing speakers that are found on more premium Dolby Atmos soundbars, like let's say the Sonos eARC, Bose Smart Soundbar 900, or Sony HTA 5000 that are needed for true Dolby Atmos support. Now, even though the JBL does have those upward firing passive radiators, those passive radiators are only putting out bass, not mids and highs. So with both the Sonos and JBL, you're not going to get the same verticality effect that you would with the more premium Dolby Atmos soundbars that I just mentioned that have those upward firing speakers. Now, before we jump into the sound test, we also need to talk about max volume performance on these soundbars. Now, both the Bose and JBL get loud enough to comfortably fill a medium-sized room with sound, and at times the JBL can get louder than the Bose. Whereas the Sonos, it just doesn't get as loud as these other two soundbars. So for that reason, I would mainly recommend the Sonos for a small living room or bedroom. This is why in the sound test, you're going to notice that the Sonos is playing at higher volumes, just so that it can keep up.
You don't like the lights. but it's camera time. Said take the picture, but you rolled your eyes. Now I'm mortified and still terrorized. Push me behind to get me from my better side. I wanna push you back, but that's all you want. Wanna rub me up, I'm holding back. Trying to get me framed for me in cuffs. Said I attacked you, that's just a false truth. No need to argue, and yeah, I've had enough. You follow me anywhere I try to be alone. I find you there. There's more to me. Everywhere I try to go alone, I find you there. You follow me anywhere I try to be alone, I find you there. Oh, there's more to me. Anywhere I try to be alone, I find you there. I find you there. I'm so scared to leave my house, so I cannot run free from this. Always being watched by you, and that's so inconsiderate. My privacy, does that exist? Probably haven't heard of it. Need to live a different life, cause lights and cameras are in it. Trying to find a silver lining. All I wanna do is avoid the violence. Put your hand again, I'm losing it. There's no one spinning and sliding. Get out my face, turn off the flash. I hate the fame. I need a break, don't feel the crowd. You follow me anywhere I try to be alone, I find you there. There's more to me. Everywhere I try to go alone, I find you there. Yeah, yeah. You follow me anywhere I try to be alone, I find you there. Oh,
So like you may have just heard, obviously any soundbar is going to sound better than your TV's built-in speakers. Your TV most likely just has a pair of downward firing speakers that bounce sound off of the table. They don't get all that loud, and at higher volumes their bass just becomes a rattling mess. And even if you were to have a more premium TV, like let's say the Samsung Q80A, whose built-in speakers don't sound all that bad, you're still going to enjoy a noticeable sound quality improvement if you were to invest in a soundbar. Now, even though the Sonos doesn't get loud enough for my liking, I do have to admit that the Sonos has the best instrument separation here, making it sound very open. And the soundbar continues to sound very clear even at those higher volumes. And trust me, you're gonna want to use max volume on this soundbar on a regular basis, especially if you plan on listening to music with this soundbar. However, when it comes to the bass on the Sonos is mostly on the audible side, meaning that you're going to hear it, but you're not really going to feel it, which could be a drawback for a soundbar because you want to feel what's happening on the screen. And even if you were to go into this soundbar's app and raise the bass, this soundbar is still going to struggle to rattle the walls and floor in your house. But then there's the Bose, which does get noticeably louder than the Sonos, which is good because it's going to be able to better satiate people in a medium-sized room. And thanks to its bass chambers, it's able to provide much better physicality in its bass, so you're going to be able to much better feel what's happening on the screen. However, I do have to admit that the Bose doesn't have as good instrument separation as the Sonos. Now, don't get me wrong, the Bose sounds good and is definitely going to get the job done, but I do feel the Sonos has the better fidelity here. And finally, there's the JBL. Now, thanks to the upwards and downward firing passive radiators, this soundbar has an above average amount of bass. The Bar 5.0 has so much bass that you're going to think that there's a subwoofer in the room, but there isn't. However, my issue with the JBL is its audio normalization. If I'm watching a movie with the soundbar, I gotta go and raise the volume on it so that I can hear what people are saying. But as soon as an action scene comes on, the highs are blaringly loud, so I gotta run over and lower the volume on this soundbar. And then once the action scene is over, I gotta go back and raise the volume on the soundbar again so that I can hear what people are saying. And the constant raising and lowering of the volume on the Bar 5.0 does get old, and this isn't an issue with either the Bose or Sonos. They both do a good job of keeping a constant volume no matter what's playing on the screen. So even though it's cool and all that the Bar 5.0 has an above average amount of bass, you do want to look out for the lack of audio normalization. But finally, let's talk about the apps and included remotes on these soundbars. Unfortunately, the JBL doesn't have an app, so all of the menu settings on the soundbar has to be done through the built-in screen and included remote. Now, you can use this remote to change your source, adjust the volume, turn Atmos on or off, and you can use it to adjust your bass. But overall, I do feel that the lack of an app is pretty bad, especially in 2022. Next up, there's the Sonos. Now, the Beam doesn't come included with a remote, but it does have onboard control buttons. And personally, I like these onboard control buttons. They're very convenient. And besides, I never really use the remote on these soundbars. I just use the app. Now, Sonos' app is fine, and I have never had any connectivity issues, and it's easy enough to use. But I do dislike that you are forced to create and sign into your Sonos account to use this app. And this app does collect a fair amount of data on you. And finally, there's the Bose. Now, the Bose does come included with a remote, and it's also convenient. But honestly, this remote just lives in the drawer, because like I said, I just use the app. And personally, I do prefer Bose's app over Sonos' app. Now, Bose's app also collects a fair amount of data on you, but it is a little less than Sonos. But I do feel that it is much better laid out, it runs much smoother, and you don't have to make an account to use this app. But finally, let's talk about pairing these soundbars up with other soundbars and speakers. Given that all of these soundbars have AirPlay 2 and Chromecast support, if you have other AirPlay 2 or Chromecast enabled speakers on your Wi-Fi network, you're going to be able to pair them all up and get them to play in sync and fill your whole house with music. However, there is one feature that the Bose does have over these other two soundbars, and that's Simple Sync. With Simple Sync, you can connect one Bluetooth device to this soundbar and get them to play in sync. Now, you can either connect a Bluetooth speaker to your soundbar, or you can connect a pair of headphones to this soundbar, and this way you can fully enjoy your content late at night without having to worry about disturbing anybody in the house. Now, Simple Sync is supposed to be product agnostic, meaning that it should work with any other Bluetooth device. However, from my experience, I have been having issues connecting my Sony 1000 XM4s to my Bose Smart Soundbar 300. So if you are planning on using Simple Sync, I'm just saying, to be on the safe side, you might want to use a pair of Bose headphones, because my Bose QC45s connect to my Bose Smart Soundbar 300 without any issues. But with all that being said, if you're trying to choose between any of these soundbars, I still feel that the Bose Smart Soundbar 300 is the safest pickup here. The Bose Smart Soundbar 300 gets decently loud, so it's going to be able to fill a medium-sized room with sound, and its bass has a good amount of physicality to it. It has a decently laid out app that's easy enough to use, and then there's also Simple Sync. However, I do feel the Bose is starting to show its age. The Bose doesn't sound as open as the Sonos Beam 2. There's also the lack of eARC support, and personally, I feel that Bose should get rid of the Ethernet port and give us an HDMI input. But overall, I do feel that the Bose Smart Soundbar 300 will not disappoint. Then there's the Sonos Beam Gen 2. I really like how this soundbar sounds. Whether you're playing Dolby Atmos content or not, this soundbar sounds very open. But personally, I can only recommend this soundbar either for small living rooms or bedrooms, because the soundbar does not get super loud. And finally, there's the JBL Bar 5.0. This thing is a straight-up bass machine thanks to its speaker setup. The soundbar is really going to make you think that there's a subwoofer in the room. I also really like that the Bar 5.0 has an HDMI input that can do 4K Dolby Vision, and I also really like that it also has eARC support. However, the lack of an app on the soundbar does make it feel old, and the audio normalization on the soundbar is a problem. Having to constantly raise and lower the volume on the soundbar whenever you're watching a movie does get annoying after a while. If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit the like button and get subscribed. If you want to pick any of the products up, they'll be linked down below. And if you want to further support the channel, check out the merch. I made some shirts and hoodies that look and feel great. And you know, I can be very particular, so I'll only slap my name on something that I'm really proud of.